I came home from a week away and found my neighbor had built a balcony over my backyard. Not near it, not facing it, actually over it, like my property line, was some kind of suggestion. And the wildest part wasn't even the wood and steel hanging in my airspace. It was how casual they were about it, like stealing a piece of someone's peace was just another home upgrade. I stood there with my suitcase still in one hand, staring up at that thing, and all I could think was, you have got to be kidding me. Now, to understand why that hit me so hard, you need to understand that backyard. I bought that house in 2018 just outside Columbus, Ohio. Small, two-story place, beige siding, older roof deck boards that squeaked like they had opinions. Nothing fancy, nothing anybody would slow down to admire. But the backyard? That was the reason I signed the papers. The lot ran way deeper than most in the neighborhood, and right near the center stood this huge old maple tree, the kind of tree that looks like it remembers things. In the summer, it threw this giant patch of shade over the yard, and in the evenings the whole place turned quiet, in a way that felt rare for the suburbs. You could sit out there with a beer and hear crickets instead of traffic leaves instead of engines. When I first walked the property with the realtor, she kept pointing out the kitchen, the updated furnace, the finished basement. I remember barely listening. I was looking past the house straight at that yard thinking, yeah, this is it. I'd just gotten back from a long overseas rotation with the National Guard, and I was tired in that deep, bone-level way you only understand after living too long in noise dust and constant alertness. I didn't want luxury. I wanted quiet. I wanted a place that felt like mine. For a few years, that's exactly what it was. The house behind mine belonged to a retired couple back then. Sweet people kept mostly to themselves. They had a little ranch home and one of those gardens that looked way too perfect to be accidental. Then they moved the house, sat empty for a while, and one morning a black pickup showed up towing a construction trailer. Not long after that, I met the new owners, Travis and Lindsay Carter. At first, they seemed fine. Friendly enough. Travis had that hyper-polished, always selling something energy. The kind of guy who smiles with all his teeth and says your name too much. Lindsay was quieter, more controlled, always looked like she had somewhere better to be. One afternoon, I was trimming the maple when Travis leaned over the fence and said, "Hey man, just wanted to give you a heads up. We're probably tearing this place down." I looked at him and said, "You mean remodeling?" He grinned. "Nope. Full rebuild. We're doing our forever home." He said forever home like he was unveiling a cathedral. I told him good luck. Truthfully, I didn't love the idea of months of construction pounding away behind my fence, but it wasn't my property. Around here, people tear down and rebuild all the time. Neighborhoods change, houses get updated. I figured it'd be loud for a while, annoying for a while, then life would settle back down. That was mistake number one. Within 2 months, the old house was gone. Then came the framing. Every morning at 7, sharp nail guns started cracking like firecrackers. Trucks idled in the street. Workers shouted measurements back and forth. Dumpsters sat half out into the road. Somebody leaned ladders against my mailbox post more than once. Little things, technically not a war crime, but enough to wear you down one splinter at a time. Still, I kept my mouth shut. Construction is temporary, I told myself. Then the new house started taking shape, and I noticed the first thing that made me uneasy. Giant windows across the back floor-to-ceiling panels pointed straight at my yard. One evening, I was on my deck with my neighbor Dave from across the street, and we were watching the framing go up in the orange light of sunset that dusty glow construction sites always seem to have. Dave squinted and said, "That's a whole lot of glass aimed at your place." I laughed it off and said, "Guess they really like trees." But even then I had a bad feeling. Privacy in the suburbs is a fragile little illusion. Everybody technically owns their space, but one badly placed window, one raised platform, one idiot with a view, and suddenly your backyard stops feeling like yours. Still, windows are windows. People close blinds. I wasn't going to start a feud over architecture. By late summer, the house was almost done. White siding, black trim, that modern farmhouse look you see all over TV now. Clean lines, expensive taste, very intentional. On the backside was a second-story living area with sliding glass doors facing my property. At that point, there was no balcony, just doors. Then in October, I had to leave town for a week for guard training in Missouri. Nothing dramatic, just routine. I locked up the house, asked Dave to keep an eye on things, and figured when I came back, the last of the construction would be wrapping up. In a way, it had. I got home that Sunday afternoon, rolled my suitcase through the side gate, stepped into the backyard. And the first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the shadow. A long rectangular shadow slicing across my grass where sunlight used to fall. I looked up and there it was, a brand new second-story balcony hanging off the back of the Carter house. And it wasn't just close to the line, it was over it. Several feet over it, there was a support post planted inside my yard, and half the branches on one side of my maple tree had been cut back, hard, not trimmed, not shaped, just hacked off to make room. For a second, I honestly thought maybe I was tired, maybe my brain hadn't fully caught up from the drive. I walked closer, looked again, measured it with my eyes, same result. That balcony was hanging over my yard like it paid taxes there. I felt this strange kind of anger rise up, not loud, not explosive, the cold kind, the kind that settles in your chest when you realize someone didn't just make a mistake. They made a choice. Somebody had looked at a property line and decided it didn't matter. I walked to their back gate and knocked once. A second later, the upstairs sliding door opened and Travis stepped out onto that balcony like a man showing off a new grill. He leaned on the railing, smiling down at me. "Hey man," he said, "you just get back." "Yeah," I said, "just got in." He tapped the railing proudly. "What do you think?" That question just hung there. I looked up at the beams, at the support post buried in my yard, at the raw-cut branches on my maple, then back at him. "What do I think about what—" He chuckled. "The balcony." I said, "Why is your balcony over my backyard?" His smile paused, not gone, just buffering. Then he shrugged. "It's just airspace." He said it so casually, like he was explaining weather. I pointed at the post. "That support's in my yard." He barely looked down. "Contractor handled all that." If you've ever heard somebody say the contractor handled it, you already know that usually means the contractor absolutely did not handle it. I said, "My tree's been cut." He glanced at the branches like he was seeing them for the first time. Yeah, they had to clear some space for the deck line. Deck line, like the universe had demanded it. I took a breath and asked, "Did anybody think to ask me?" He scratched the back of his neck. I figured it'd be fine. That was the moment I understood the real problem. He didn't think we were having a dispute. He thought the dispute was over. Build it big enough, act confident enough, and maybe the other guy just shrugs and lives with it. I didn't argue right there. I just said, "I'm going to check my survey." He nodded like I'd said I was going to water the lawn. "Sure thing, man." I went inside, pulled out the folder with all my closing paperwork, found the survey, then came back out with a tape measure. From the fence, from the corner marker, from the old pin location, I measured everything twice. The balcony wasn't barely over the line. It was almost 3 feet over. The post was more than 2 feet inside my property. I took photos from every angle, measured again, took more. Dave wandered over from across the street while I was doing it. He looked up and said, "Holy hell." "Right," I said. He walked under the overhang, shook his head, then said the sentence that ended up mattering more than either of us knew at the time. "You know, while you were gone, I saw them building this thing fast, like weird fast. Almost like they were trying to finish before anybody asked questions." That was the first twist. Until then, I thought they were arrogant. In that moment, I started wondering if they were also sneaky. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, reading city zoning rules. Setbacks, encroachments, projections, permit requirements, the kind of stuff nobody cares about until somebody's deck is floating over their lawn. The more I read, the worse it looked for them. The next morning, I called the city building department. A woman named Carol answered, calm voice, the tone of somebody who had spent years listening to neighbors explain why this was absolutely insane. I told her what happened. She asked for photos. I emailed them. 10 minutes later, she called me back. "Sir," she said, "that appears to be a structural encroachment." That was the first time I heard the phrase, and honestly, it sounded beautiful. She asked if I had a survey. I sent that too. 3 days later, a white city truck pulled up behind the Carter house. The inspector, Mike, was a mid-50s guy with a clipboard, work boots, and the tired expression of a man who has seen every possible flavor of bad decision. We walked the property line together while he measured the post, measured the overhang, studied the tree, and wrote everything down. Then he looked up at the balcony and asked, "Did they pull a permit for this?" "I have no idea," I said. He nodded. "We're about to find out." He walked next door and knocked. Travis opened the door, and from my yard, I watched that familiar smile slowly die when he noticed the city seal on the truck. They talked for maybe 10 minutes. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Mike pointed at the post, then up at the balcony, then into his folder. A minute later, he slapped a bright orange notice onto the sliding door leading outside. Even from my yard, I could read it. Violation notice. Work halted. That afternoon, Travis showed up at my door with none of the charm left. No smile, no buddy-buddy tone. "You called the city?" he asked. I leaned on the frame. "Yeah." He exhaled hard. "You could have talked to me first." I nearly laughed. I did. Then Lindsay stepped in, smooth voice, controlled face, trying to play diplomat. "Look, we're neighbors. We don't want this to turn into something ugly." I said, "Then move the balcony." She gave me that tight little smile people use when they're trying not to show panic. That would mean redesigning the roof line. There it was, the truth. Money, time, convenience. They'd built it the easiest way possible and bet I wouldn't fight back. She offered to maintain the tree professionally. Travis repeated that line about airspace. I looked past them at that structure looming over my yard and said, "From up there you can see straight into my bedroom and my office. This isn't nothing." He shrugged. "So can half the neighborhood." "No," I said, "they can't." And they knew I was right. For the next few weeks, things got tense. The balcony sat there, unusable violation notice flapping on the glass whenever the wind picked up. Workers came out, measured things, left. Nobody smiled anymore. Nobody waved. The whole thing just hung there like a frozen bad choice. Then came the second twist. About 3 weeks later, Carol called again. "The review is complete," she said. I sat down at my kitchen table and braced myself. She told me the balcony had never been permitted as a projecting structure, and the support posts were officially measured at 28 inches inside my property line. 28 inches. Hearing it said out loud made it feel different. Not my opinion, not a neighbor, fight a fact. Then she said the words I'd been hoping for. "The homeowners have been given 30 days to correct the violation." Correct it how I asked. A pause. Either remove the structure or relocate it so it fully complies. That meant the balcony was coming down. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since I first saw it: peace. Because once the city stepped in, it stopped being about me versus them. It became about reality. The waiting after that was the weirdest part. Travis avoided me. Lindsay avoided me. Sometimes I'd catch him out there just staring at the balcony like a man trying to will a parking ticket into disappearing. One afternoon, he stopped at the fence while I was raking leaves and said, "You're really going to make us tear that down?" I leaned on the rake and said, "I didn't make that decision. You built on my property." He shook his head. "It's 2 feet. It's my 2 feet." That shut him up. Day 32, the trucks came back. Only this time they weren't delivering materials. They were taking them away. I stood in my kitchen with a mug of coffee and watched 3 workers climb onto that balcony with drills, pry bars, and the kind of body language that says we know exactly why we're here. First came the railing metal brackets popping loose. Then the deck boards, each one ripped up with that hard cracking sound wood makes when it's been screwed down tight. By afternoon, half the platform was gone. Travis stood in the yard watching it happen, hands on hips, not saying a word. Day 2, they took out the beams. Thick wooden supports that had been hanging over my grass like a threat. Each one came down with a thud that felt almost therapeutic. By day 3, all that was left were the posts sunk into concrete in my yard. Those took the most work. Shovels jackhammer busted chunks of concrete hauled off in buckets. And then finally the last post came out. For the first time in over a month, there was nothing hanging over my yard. Just open sky. The foreman walked over afterward, wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "Sorry you had to deal with that." I told him I appreciate you fixing it. He laughed and said, "Wasn't our design." That may have been the most honest sentence anybody said the whole time. They filled the hole with fresh soil, scattered grass seed over it, and by the end of the afternoon it looked like the earth itself was trying to forget the whole thing happened. A couple weeks later, construction started again. They built a new balcony, smaller this time, fully inside their property line, angled away from my yard so it couldn't stare into my windows. Whoever redesigned it made sure it didn't even look in my direction. Travis and I never had another real conversation after that. Not dramatic, not explosive, just cold distance, the kind that grows when 2 people both know exactly where the line is. And honestly, that suited me just fine, because my backyard became mine again. Summer came back. The maple filled out. The light returned to the grass where that ugly shadow used to fall. I could sit out there at night and hear the leaves move, feel the air cool down, and remember why I bought that place in the first place. That whole mess taught me something I wish more people understood. Entitlement gets loud when it thinks nobody will challenge it. Some people really do believe confidence can replace permission, that if they act like a line doesn't matter, then maybe it won't. But property lines, like personal boundaries, only stay real if you're willing to defend them. The hard truth is polite people get counted on to stay quiet. And the moment you don't, suddenly you're the difficult one. Funny how that works. Still, I think about one thing every now and then. If Travis had just knocked on my door before building that thing, if he'd come over like a normal human being and said, "Hey, here's what we're thinking, can we talk?" Maybe this story ends differently, maybe not. But once you decide to trespass first and negotiate later, you're not asking for understanding anymore. You're gambling with somebody else's peace. And sometimes karma shows up wearing a city badge, carrying a clipboard, and stapling an orange notice to your door. So I've got to ask, if you came home and found out your neighbor had built part of their house over your yard, would you have tried to settle it privately, or would you have called the city right away? Was I protecting my rights, or did I go too far once I realized they weren't taking me seriously? Tell me where you land, because this kind of thing always splits people right down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor, an HOA, a contractor, or anybody who thought the rules somehow stopped at your fence line, drop your story too. I want to hear it.